Let's bring in Dave Keating, our Brussels correspondent, watching all developments first. Dave, very good evening. Any sign of agreement? There must be some common ground here.
There was no sign of agreement today, but we weren't expecting one. This was actually not the first time that Starmer and von der Leyen have met. They actually were just meeting last week in New York at the UN General Assembly. But this, as you said, was the first formal talks to start this reset that Starmer has said that he wants. The problem is that while the mood music certainly has changed from the very bad relations that existed in the previous Conservative government, Starmer's red lines are the same as Boris Johnson's. And so the problem is there isn't actually a lot that can be fine-tuned with that Brexit deal as long as he maintains the same red lines. So when he came today, the EU was hoping that he might have some ideas for some practical applications of this new resetting of relations, but apparently there was nothing on the table. The only thing they agreed today was to have future meetings. They agreed that the EU and the UK will hold meetings regularly starting early next year. It's incredible that that's actually an improvement on previous relations, but it actually is. The previous UK government wouldn't even agree to that. The issue is basically all of these things that the UK wants: the security agreement, a veterinary pact, all these measures that would help loosen all of this new Brexit red tape that came in and has been really hurting the economy. They really want to turn the economy around. Getting those trade restrictions loosened would really help in that, but as long as he maintains his red lines, it's really not a possibility. Now, you mentioned the youth mobility scheme. This is an idea from the EU for something that wouldn't violate Starmer's red lines. It would allow UK students to go to the EU countries and study for up to 4 years and vice versa, without having to get a student visa, in other words. But Starmer has shot that down. They're afraid that looks too much like free movement. Of course, it isn't. They have similar agreements with Canada and Australia, but it really shows how much the optics are a concern here, particularly for those Labour voters who voted for Brexit in 2016 and voted for Starmer in July. They're being extremely cautious here. But the problem is there is time running out, and the patience, I think, on the EU side is starting to wear thin because they're asking, okay, it's nice, this new tone, but where's the beef? Where's the actual offer? And what does Keir Starmer really want?
Indeed, like you said, there needs to be some beef in that baguette, doesn't there, really? And Brexit was one of these issues that really cut across party politics in the UK because, as you just pointed out, there were so many traditional Labour voters who actually were persuaded somehow to vote for Brexit, and seeing that it wasn't in their interest to have freedom of movement, and it wasn't in their interest to have this possibility of moving around Europe with all those opportunities it could present them. What I'm wondering is, Dave, can you see there's any kind of room where there could be some sort of common ground there where they could make some compromises? Do you think there's anything coming on the horizon which might signal a sort of better agreement, shall we say?
I don't get the impression that Starmer is going to relent on this red lines issue, but there are a couple things that could go around the red lines. For instance, one, I think, really urgent agreement they need to come to is, as of April next year, British citizens will have to apply for security pre-clearance in order to enter the EU, and vice versa for EU citizens going to the UK. That's because these new pre-clearance schemes are going into effect for both the UK and the EU, similar to what the US has. Now, in the US, it exempts its closest neighbor, Canada, from that. It would be logical that the EU and the UK would exempt each other from these new schemes, but apparently that isn't even being discussed. So it seems like little things like that should be something they're talking about. I don't really understand why, for instance, they're not talking about that. That seems fairly urgent. It's coming up in just a couple of months. There are other issues, too, where the full pain of Brexit hasn't even hit fully. The UK hasn't fully implemented the withdrawal agreement. And actually, von der Leyen reminds Starmer of that here at the EU headquarters behind me when they were speaking next to each other. She said, look, before we can start talking about anything else, the existing Brexit withdrawal agreement needs to be fully implemented. The UK still is not fully applying customs checks for goods coming from the EU. So there is a time limit here. And so they need to get something. There needs to be something tangible quickly, or else the momentum is going to be lost. So whether it's the youth mobility scheme or maybe an agreement on exempting each other from these new pre-clearance schemes, there has to be some kind of signal, or else I think if we get to the end of the year and there hasn't been anything, the momentum will have been lost, and we're probably not going to see any major change in EU-UK practical relations as a result.
Dave, thank you for those concrete examples. I can add anecdotally that every time I go back to the UK, and I've got lots of family in the UK, of course, still, I don't find anybody who says that Brexit has been a good thing, and some of those people actually voted for Brexit. So there we go. That's my anecdote about it. But Dave there with the hard facts, as always. Thank you, Dave. Great to see you. Dave Keating, our correspondent, explaining Brussels to us. Great guy.